Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
One of the big stories over the weekend that has garnered huge attention, not just here in Ireland, but across the water as well in the United States, because the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, has actually got involved in the debate around Ireland's legislation. Ireland's new proposed hate speech laws have been getting a lot of international attention. The likes of Elon Musk, as I said, Donald Trump Jr. have weighed in, effectively warning us not to bring them in. The bill has been labelled as a thought crime bill, a reference to the novel from 1984 by George Orwell, which described a dystopian society where thinking was monitored. However, everyone from Sinn Féin to Leo Varadkar seems in favour of criminal justice, incitement to violence or hatred and hate offences Bill 2022. And it was approved by 110 votes to 14. Yes, only 14 were against it, with 110 yeses, including Sinn Féin, Labour, the Green Party, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil. The no votes came from People Before Profit, alongside Aontú and several independents. Now, the bill seeks to amend the law relating to the prohibition of incitement to hatred against a person or group of persons on account of certain characteristics of the persons or group. Now, in case you don't know what the groups are, just to remind you, those protected characteristics are race, colour, nationality, religion, national or ethnic origin, descent, gender, sex characteristics, sexual orientation or disability. And this is the bill's definition of what gender means. The gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender or with which the person identified, and includes transgender and a gender other than those of male and female. Just in case you're confused as to what gender means. We see some media are playing down the impact of these new laws, and we see some saying it's very dangerous. And I do have my own personal views on it, but for the purpose of the debate tonight, and I want you to get involved, I do want to remain impartial on it. So for the purpose of the debate, I do want to remain impartial, although I'm sure if most of you read my Twitter account, you know my personal views on the matter. Anyway, the number is 087 188 0008. That's 087 188 0008. And I want you to get involved. Do you believe these hate speech laws are necessary? To remind people again, we already had the Prohibition of Incitement to Hatred Act 1989. And here on radio and television, we have the Broadcasting Authority Incitement to Hatred Act as well. So we're pretty much protected in those circumstances. But the argument is we need to update the laws, because nowadays, of course, we have social media. And social media means that everybody is broadcasting essentially to the world and to the friends around them. And that if you incite hatred against one person, or the person feels that you're inciting hatred against them, they can have you charged. I want to know, is it right? Some people would say, well, yes, Niall, we need to stop racism. We need to stop transphobic comments. We need to stop homophobic comments. We need to stop comments about people's religion and vice versa. Let me know what you think. The number is 087 188 0008. That's 087 188 0008. Do you believe Ireland needs new hate speech laws? And joining me on the phone is the independent TD for Roscommon and Galway, who voted no, Michael Fitzmaurice. Michael, good evening to you.
How are you now? You doing well?
I'm good, Michael. Now, I want to take, an impartial stance in relation to this. And the argument is, the legislation that we originally had is 1989. It's very old. It doesn't include the internet. Didn't really include much media, because there wasn't that much media around at the time, probably 2 radio stations. So realistically, it had to be updated. Is that a good argument?
Well, first of all, I want to make it very clear that I don't condone anybody that calls somebody something or incites anything. I don't condone that. I want to be very clear on that. But it's a very simple reason why I voted against this. I would have talked to people that would have a legal brain, and their interpretation of it, in advice back to me, was that it is clumsy legislation, it is badly worded, and it could be basically interpreted in a lot of different ways that could have somebody that may be completely innocent basically brought into disrepute or brought into trouble. And if we as legislators don't do legislation right, and I have no objections to, if people are homophobic or whatever, I absolutely don't condone that in any way.
Oh, but let me ask you a question. Let me ask a question. You have no objection to somebody being homophobic. When I say you have an objection to people being homophobic, of course people should. Absolutely. But is it a crime to be homophobic? Do you think it should be a crime?
No. Hold on. If someone makes a remark about someone in any way, you don't condone that. Simple as that. But
Well, let me give you an example, Michael. It would be fair to give for our listeners to give an example of what we might be talking about, okay? So, and I am using this as an example, so please, people, don't take it personally. So somebody goes onto Twitter, they go onto Facebook, they go onto social media, or indeed they get a letter printed in a local newspaper saying, I don't believe that a man can become a woman. I think it's a fallacy, and I think it's absolute and utter nonsense. Now, if you're a member of the transgender community, you could find that quite offensive, and you could say that's hatred. Should that person be charged with a crime?
Look, this is obviously, if you see social media, you'll see those type of allegations made. I believe that people have a right to say things, but you don't. You have to. There's a line you can cross as well, in my opinion. But what concerns me is that my understanding from the legal people that I've talked to, that someone could send you something on your phone. It could be on your computer, and you could be trying to defend yourself out of something, and that you had no hand act or part in. You would never be putting that out or doing anything like that, and you could be pulled into something because of clumsy legislation.
Okay, I'm going to read that for the listeners, and for the purpose of the listeners listening. That is Section 3. And it says, in any proceedings for an offence under the section where it is proved that the accused person was in possession of material as is referred to in subsection 1, which is incitement to hatred, and it is reasonable to assume that that material was not intended for personal use or the person shall be presumed until the contrary is proved to have been in possession of the material and contravention of subsection 1. In other words, you're guilty till you can prove yourself innocent.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous wording, in my opinion. And going by the legal people, and I want to be very clear that I don't condone anyone calling somebody something in any way, but in fairness, and anybody could be seeing something. It could be on their phone. They could, if they didn't delete it, or on their computer, they could be trying to defend themselves from something that they had no hand act or part in, and that's a worry. That's the big worry, I think, in all of this.
Well, I did plan to have Dessie Ellis on from Sinn Féin, but unfortunately he's not answering our calls at the moment. We did have to plan to have him on the show. Were you surprised that, aside from yourself and 13 others, that 110 TDs, our politicians, voted in favour of this legislation? Even people before Profit, surprisingly enough, maybe for their own various reasons, voted against it. Were you surprised by that?
Well, look, it's up to every TD and every individual to vote how they want, and look at the whip. To be quite honest with you, the whip is going to whip in the government in line. I was surprised at the concern, because if you watch this when it came into the Dáil at the beginning, a lot of people expressed concern about it, and no more than lots of bits of legislation, there was basically nothing changed in it. In fairness to Paul Murphy, he had a few amendments down, but as per usual with amendments, they don't be accepted, to be quite frank about it. And the wording that you were after reading out there, and I'm not a legal person you have to get knowledge from people that would be better to interpret something than the likes of me would in legislation. And there was serious concerns while people aren't against a bill. I want to be clear on that. In the line, if a bill stops, basically, stuff that should never be said, that's understandable. But if it's put in a way that somebody that could send something, I could send something, or somebody send something to you, say you're in the media there, the TDs are there, and everyone has their phone numbers. We get all types of emails and all types of stuff into either our phone there's people with different agendas and different.
Okay, the Catholic Church have had huge concerns about this since last year. In the Irish Times last year, the Catholic Church has said that this, in turn, doesn't protect religion. That, for example, as we all know, Christianity and most religions would suggest, for example, that homosexuality is abhorrent. Okay, not that everyone agrees with that, but that's what Christianity preaches. And they believe that that's a contradiction of their right under the Constitution to practice their religion. Do you accept that, or do you think that I mean, I wouldn't agree with a lot of the bigoted stuff that comes out of the Catholic Church, mind you, but I'm just saying, would you accept that they have a right to hold such a view?
Well, sure, look, at different people will hold different views, and different organisations will always hold different views. That's their belief or whatever, but it may not be our beliefs. But the one thing that you have to be careful on here, this is about the legal interpretation of it. That's what I'm being very clear on. And the legal interpretation seems to have it that,
But whatever. But let's go to Section 1, subsection A, right? And it says, prepares or possesses material that is likely to incite violence or hatred against any person or group of persons on account of the protected characteristics. Now, I read out to the people in the protected characteristics, including sexual orientation, disability characteristics, sex, gender, transgender, descent, ethnic origin, nationality, colour, race and creed. So, in other words, if I have a view on immigration, for example, and we have had numerous protests in relation to immigration at the moment, and people say certain things or whatever, they believe their right to have a view, whether you agree with it or not, or whether you agree or think it may be verging on racism, they believe that their right to have that view and hold that view is now going to be counteracted by this particular legislation, where the Gardaí will be knocking on the door and saying, look what you put up on Facebook last night.
Well, the danger on this is, and everyone in public life knows it, that there's different people have different views on certain things. They may send stuff on, be it Twitter, their views on Twitter, their views on Elon Musk, their views on, as you said, immigration, asylum seekers, all the different things. And the likes of you at your job, or the likes of us at our job, we get all different sides, in emails, in everything. And if one of them emails are within in our computers, if any of that stuff ever comes to our phone, and are we then breaking the law, and have we to go proven? This is the worry that's in it. And, we have to be very careful. Obviously...
Is it censorship? Michael, do you believe it's censorship? Elon Musk believes it's censorship. It goes against the very foundation of freedom of expression and speech.
Well, look, sometimes expression goes over the top, to be quite frank about it.
There's no doubt about that.
And, you see there sometimes on social media, and it's damnable what's said and what's, said about people. And, even...
But the point is, where do you stop then? Is there a law against talking about red-headed people, about short people, about tall people, people with glasses? I mean, where does it stop?
Well, there's a bit of a difference talking about...
No, I'm just saying that we could all consider, when it talks about characteristics, you could this. I mean, once you bring in legislation like this, what happens down the road? Do we protect it? Do we have more characteristics being protected? People who are overweight.
Legislation evolves. In fairness, you said, I think since 1990-something.
1989, yes.
1989 to hadn't changed since. And there probably is parts of legislation that needs upgrading, in fairness to all of that. But what I am very clear on, and what I want to be clear on, is that while you don't condone anyone saying certain things, you have to be careful that innocent people aren't brought in because something was into their laptop or whatever. And that's a real danger. And when you hear legal people, because obviously I'm a lay person, I'm not a legal person, and when you hear some people that would have a legal, say, brain, saying to you, I think that the interpretation is very dangerous in this, that it could be, that it could actually go too far, that the interpretation could end up some innocent person being brought in to try and defend themselves, and they're completely innocent of something. Well, then you're crossing a dangerous line, and you need to make sure that when you do legislation, that basically, it sorts out what you want to do, but also make sure that innocent people aren't caught up.
But when we say innocent people, how are we, or who is the person, apart from a judge in a courtroom, going to define what is hatred? Because my opinions on certain things, or your opinions, Michael, or our next caller, Susan's opinion, who's going to be on in a few minutes, she might have opinions, you might have opinions, I might have opinions that might offend another person. Do you understand, about their characteristics? And they might say, well, that brings hatred upon my community just because you have an opinion. So who decides what's hatred? Because it's a very strong word for an opinion. I mean, somebody's opinion might be abhorrent. It might not be what you think is the right thing to say. But, you know, to say, like, if I say something on the air, I don't want to pick on a particular community, but if I say something on the air about a certain type of community and some looper out there takes me very seriously and says, Niall Boylan is right, I'm going to go out and beat one of them up tomorrow, that's not my fault. I can't be responsible for that, nor can you or nor can anybody else. So how are we deciding what hatred is or incitement to hatred is?
I don't know how we're going to actually decide it, but what I am trying to be very clear on to you, that if that person sent you something, or if that person sent me something or anybody else, and that was on their laptop or on their phone, and that was seen or whatever, or that person was brought in for something and then they saw that something went to you or somebody else, well then is there a danger that someone else will be brought in to something that they had no hand, act or part in, and that's what you have to be worried about, and that's what you have to be careful about. Like, you know, in fairness, some people go over the top. There's no point in saying they don't. And that's not, you can't condone any of that. But what I don't want to see, and us as legislators at the moment, when you bring in legislation, it should be done fairly right, that there's no sort of middle ground or no uncertainty about it.
Yeah.
But when you are now hearing people that would be talking to the likes of me or talking to the likes of you, that would have basically a legal brain on them, and they say, I'd be a bit concerned about this, the interpretation. That's the wording that I have got from a few people that I spoke to, and well, like, Jesus, you have to be careful then what you vote for.
Well, but the way I look at it is, if we continue and we take this law literally as it's written in the bill, I think that's the end of talk shows on radio, because people won't be able to come on and give their opinions anymore for fear that, you know, A, they might say something that might incite hatred or incite some looper out there to hate a community, and secondly, from our point of view, and from my point of view, as a presenter of the show, we will be in possession of that material. So for being in possession of that material.
The question even is us as politicians, if we go criticising a minister or something about something and we say, well, this is going to destroy this, that, or the other is going to do, are we turning around and are we going to be blamed for all of that as well? You know, you don't, I'm back to the one word, interpretation of it and how it will be used. And we don't know that this minute, and I think that's a sort of a dangerous way to be.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much indeed, and I appreciate you coming on the air. TD for Roscommon Galway, Michael Fitzmaurice, I appreciate you coming on the air. Sorry, we did plan to get Desi Ellis from Sinn Féin, who had voted yes in favour of it, but unfortunately Desi can't make himself available for us at the moment. Maybe we'll try and get him later in the show. Susan, you're on Ireland's Classic Hits Radio. How you doing, Susan?
Hi, Niall, how are you?
Now, Susan, if you were there voting, you'd be voting in favour of this legislation.
Absolutely, yeah.
You have a transgender son.
Yeah,
and you agree with the legislation. Tell me why you agree with the legislation.
I agree with it because in the last maybe year or two, there's just been a real upscale in hatred towards the LGBT community, to the trans community. People can say what they want. I mean, really, really vile stuff, and get away with it, and people have no problem. And then you have people who are listening to this and they're believing all this stuff, and it needs to be stopped. You know, you can't you can't turn around and say that my son is a groomer or my son is a paedophile.
Oh no, well, I wouldn't. Well, to be honest with you, if somebody says your son is a paedophile, they should be in court for defamation of character. You know what I mean?
No,
and they should be.
It's all transgender people.
Mm.
Everyone who's transgender, they're automatically grouped as a paedophile or a child groomer.
Mm.
I'm constantly seeing it now. You know, everywhere I look, especially online, it's everywhere. It's disgusting. And it should be stopped.
Well, the only people who should be referred to as groomers or paedophiles are groomers and paedophiles. And if anybody, by the way, can I just say, we do have a defamation laws in relation to that. But just in relation to say, and I please don't take any offence when I say this, because I think it's important for the listeners to use levels of examples of what we might be actually talking about. If somebody is on Twitter or is on Facebook or is on social media of any description and puts down, I don't believe that a man can become a woman, or I don't believe a woman can become a man, that in turn could be considered to be hate speech because
Well, that to me wouldn't be hate speech. That's somebody's opinion. There's a big difference between.
But
having
who
an opinion.
decides? See, here's the problem with the legislation. It's so vague that who decides what's hatred? Because if I said that tomorrow, for example, right, and I turned around and said something like that, and then somebody said, "Oh, I heard Niall Boylan saying that. He's dead right. Men can't be women. Women can't be men. I'm going to go out and beat a few of them up." But I can't be responsible for how
why?
somebody
No,
else
there's
takes
no
that.
There's no reason why you'd beat because you don't like somebody who's different to you. But to say, "Oh no," that they're going to rape a child. That and with
By the way, I'm not saying I would say that on the air. I'm just as an example.
Yeah. Oh no, I know.
I'm using it as an example. And also the Catholic Church, for example, and I mentioned to Michael Fitzmaurice, the TD, they are concerned because the Catholic Church, as you know, don't accept transgenderism. They don't accept homosexuality. And they believe it's the devil's work. They believe it's abhorrent. So should they not be allowed to say that anymore?
Well, I mean, we're a family of atheists, so it doesn't really bother us.
Well, absolutely, I know. But should they be allowed to say, things like that they believe, say, homosexuality is abhorrent or whatever it happens to be? Should they be allowed to say those things?
They can say them, but again, it's not causing hatred. It's not causing someone to want to hurt my son or, my son's friends.
And I agree with you, Susan. And I agree with you. But the thing about it is, I'm concerned about this legislation, like many people, that the legislation goes too far.
I'm concerned about my son and his friends, and that they're at the point now that they can't go out the door practically, and they're roared at and shouted at. And this is only in the last year or two.
And tell me, and
look at all the stuff.
I'm sorry to hear that. I really am, and it must be difficult as a parent.
Sam Smith.
Yeah.
But that absolutely is, and the fear every time he goes out the door, is he going to come in the door?
Well, now, to be fair, Susan, Sam Smith is probably not the best example to use because he draws attention to himself.
Okay, he absolutely does. But when you see online, he's a paedophile. He's a paedophile because he's different. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing to say he's a paedophile, but it's okay to go online and call him a paedophile.
I don't think he's a paedophile. I think his behaviour.
Oh
is
no,
quite,
I don't at all.
I think his behaviour is questionable, to be honest with you. But I don't think he's a paedophile.
But he's not grooming children, and he's not a paedophile. But why is it okay for people to say this stuff online? Because he's different.
Well, if somebody calls Sam Smith a paedophile and it's online, I would like to think that Sam Smith's lawyers would find out who the person is. And again,
I'm sure.
There's legislation there for that.
Again, I see it everywhere. I see it.
But explain, Susan, I want people maybe to have a level of understanding of what it's like for you as a parent of a transgender child. When you're going, I'm sorry, how old is your son?
He's just gone 21.
Okay, well, he's not a child anymore. He's a young man now.
Yeah, well, he was 15 when he came out.
Yeah. So and what's it like when you go out? Is there name calling? Do you get any of that?
You get sniggers, a lot of sniggers, a lot of people talking under their breath. A lot of looking over.
I think it's probably a lot easier.
Most people are okay.
I think it's easier in society for a woman to transition to a man because it can be. It's a lot more normalised. When I say normalised, a woman can look like a man very easily. Whereas I think it's much more difficult, obviously, for a man to look like a woman and look feminine.
Totally agree.
Totally
agree. We had a party recently, and there was a few of everybody there, and there were a lot of snickers given to the transgender women. Which I, again, didn't like. If you're not nice to say, just leave.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. If you've not nice to say, don't say anything at all. Probably it's the best rule of thumb. But in saying that, obviously, the discourse that goes on social media and people get into conversations and heated debates.
I'm actually at the point that I rarely go on now. I used to be an avid user and I just can't because I'm just getting so angry. And I know I'm going to say something.
That you'll regret.
And I don't want to do that, So I rarely go on to these. I mean, there's a page. I'm not going to name the page, but it's all Irish mothers and the stuff coming out of their mouth, about, we'll say all of them. There's a small cohort of them, and it's absolutely vile.
Yeah, and I know the page. I know the page you're talking about.
Yeah. And absolutely vile.
In relation to this getting now international news. Elon Musk, Donald Trump Jr. has got involved. Elon Musk, obviously the wealthiest man in the world, the most popular man on social media. He's got 135 million followers. Has said that the Irish legislation contradicts freedom of speech. What do you say to that?
As I said, I mean, there's ways of saying things that isn't, you could turn around. I think you said you could turn around and say, like, I don't like, the LGBT, transgender men because I don't believe it's natural. There's only two, or there's like.
But that could be perceived as hatred. That could be perceived as hatred.
No, but that's your opinion. That is an opinion.
Yeah, we'd like to think that's somebody's opinion,
that,
whether you agree with it or not. I'd like to think it's somebody's opinion.
Someone's opinion. There's a and then you have the likes of all trans men are paedophiles. They're all and transgender women, and they're all going to follow your children into the toilets and rape them. That's hate speech. When you're trying to change somebody's opinion on why you don't like a different community.
Okay, well, do me a favour. Stay there, Susan, for a second if you can.
Yeah.
Brian, you're in Ireland's Classic Hits. Oh, Byron, you're in Ireland's Classic Hits Radio. How you doing, Byron?
Hello.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
Brian, yeah.
Oh, Brian, sorry.
Niall, yeah. I disagree with this act because I think it puts people into boxes and basically that causes problems because you're only categorizing people in a bad way. In
what respect?
You're causing problems for the people that you're trying to protect.
Give me an example. Well, give me an example of what you mean, Brian. Sorry, give me an example of what you mean.
An example would be that I suppose for like transgender or whatever.
I don't want to focus just on transgender. We'll talk about race, and we can talk about gender identity, and we can talk about gender in general, or characteristics like members of the travelling community, etc., etc. There's all different characteristics protected.
Okay, all those characters are being put in boxes, and basically, by putting people in boxes, you're putting them in danger, as far as I'm concerned.
Why? They're minorities, aren't they? They're minorities, and that's why the government feels they need to be protected.
The Equality Act has already covered that.
Fair point.
We don't need any other. We don't need any other legislation with regards to that. And basically,
well, the Equality Act. In relation to the Equality Act and the Equality Authority, that's not actually legislation as such. The Equality Authority are there to make sure that people are treated equally. It doesn't necessarily cut out insults. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Okay, well, you're never going to cut out insults, I don't believe, anyway. I don't think you're going to... You can't control people, with insults. They're always going to
do you think racism is acceptable?
People can't slag each other anymore?
No, but people should be able to slag each other. That's a bit of banter. But are you saying, for example, racism is acceptable? Is racism acceptable?
No, it's not. Well, then, it never should be.
Okay, so should somebody be charged for racism online? If I go online tonight and say that all black people should be sent home, I'm giving you an example. Should I be charged?
If you said what?
If I turned around online tonight and said all African or all black people should be sent back to their country of origin, should I be charged? That could be deemed to be racist by most people.
Well, it depends whether you're just picking on the black people or whether.
Well, I've just told you what I've just said, so assumingly I am. So
okay, yeah. Well, maybe you should be so.
Okay, so then isn't that what Susan is saying, that we need laws to protect people?
Yeah, I do, but I think in the end it backfires. Basically, because you're actually pointing out a section of community where people can say attack them in the long run.
I don't really understand the point you're making, to be honest with you, Brian. Susan, stay with me. Niamh, you're on Ireland's Classic Hits Radio. How you doing, Niamh?
How you doing? How are you now?
Okay.
Good. Thanks very much, Brian. Sorry, Niamh, go ahead.
I think it's a shame that we need this legislation.
Do we need it?
I think, unfortunately, it's come to the stage where we probably do, and I think it's a shame because people aren't standing up. You know, if you see something that's really wrong, you know, and I have seen it, just like Susan said, I have seen stuff that's being said, and it's just downright nasty. Now, I can't actually decide myself whether it's hate speech. It's not.
Well, if you can't
inciting
decide, how's a
hatred.
judge? Well, if you can't decide, how's a judge going to
This is the
decide?
problem. This is the problem, and this is why I think it's a shame because people aren't standing up. You know, if you see something that is inherently wrong, if you know, as you said, there is a big difference between an opinion and hatred. If you say
There's a fine line.
if you say I don't believe that there is more than two genders, that's your opinion. If you say I don't believe there's more than two genders and all transgender people should be rounded up, that's hatred. There is a difference, but people aren't standing up. It's like this, and I hate to use the word because I hated it all the way through COVID and I still hate it, but there is a sheep mentality. People are just jumping on saying, oh yeah, you're right. You know, whether it's because they're afraid to stand up and say, no, that is a really horrible and nasty thing to say. Please just
And
stop.
I completely agree with you. The second part of what you said, people, and you're right. People are entitled to opinion. If they believe there's two genders, there's two genders. That's fine. But what I'm saying to you is, people's opinions do go a little bit further sometimes. I'm not suggesting for a minute people shouldn't be made account and held accountable if they say something as horrific as I believe all of a certain community should be beaten up or should be tracked down or whatever it is. Right? Of course they should be. But in saying that, who makes the decision as to what's hatred? Because realistically, Niamh, what you just said was, I don't believe there's more than two genders. There's non-binary people listening tonight. There are people who identify as different genders. They're saying that's hatred, Niamh.
No, that's
Who
not
are you to
necessarily-
argue?
That's not my opinion.
Well,
I'm just saying that's what I'm
No.
hearing
I'm
you
just saying
say.
the example you
Yeah.
gave me. But,
Oh, absolutely.
but what I'm saying
Absolutely.
is, who decides? They would argue that is hatred. You're casting hatred against them.
I think I don't think anybody should live in fear. I mean, what Susan said about her son.
Yeah, that's wrong. She shouldn't have to be going out and
horrible,
protecting
and
her
I
like that.
I'm a mother of two kids myself, and I'm nervous enough when my daughter goes out. I can't imagine how you feel, Susan. I can't imagine it. And my heart breaks for you every time, you know, this conversation comes up. And it's horrible. But at the end of the day, the problem that we're having now is that people seem to think that that social media is open season. Say what you want with absolutely no consequences. I absolutely believe in free speech. I believe in free speech, but I also believe that free speech comes with consequences. It's not free. If you are prepared to stand up and say something, you know, and we all, now, there is a difference. You know, you'd have to be very, very stupid not to see the difference between somebody's opinion and something that is just so out there that it makes you catch your breath when you read it. You know, it's obvious. And, you know, there are people, you know, certain people that make almost a living out of it on social media. Just, you know, so cut the head off the snake. Take it away from them. If this is their little platform where they feel that they have an audience, take their audience away. Silent, you know, don't, you know, they did it before. You can take people's social media away and you can stop them from having other accounts, making up fake accounts. It can be done if the social media companies gave enough of a crap, less about money and more about the actual social side of it. They do it, but they won't. And it's a shame that yet again we need the government to step in and tell us what to do. But because people just don't seem to be anymore able to stand up for what's basically right and wrong. And I'm not just talking about the LGBTQ community. It's every community, the travelling community, our guests that are in our country, their community. If you're in any way different, you're an absolute target. And that is what we're handing over to our kids, because our kids are allegedly allowed on social media from the age of 13. And this is what they're going to be learning and seeing, because they don't listen to us. They listen to the gobshites on TikTok who are telling them what to think. And it's going to have to come down to the social media giants turning around saying, okay, fine, we'll take a hit on the profits. We'll take some of the popular people off. We'll show that it's not acceptable. But they won't do that. So now we have to have a government legislation because they won't bother.
All right, we'll stay there for a second because I want to go to Anya as well. Anya, you're in Ireland's Classic Hits Radio. How you doing, Anya?
Oh, yeah.
How you doing? Anya, you don't agree with this legislation?
I don't, because as you said, I was going to say, how do you define hate speech? Who defines it? You know? And I think they're going to use people's opinions against them. I really do. And I no disrespect to that lady that's on, I really mean that. But all I'm seeing is this gender ideology, and that's the way I think, and I don't mean any disrespect. I really don't. And I'd always respect people, and I wouldn't slag anyone off. But it seems very close to that to me, you know.
So
Maybe
you don't think
wrong.
you think it's more than a coincidence this legislation is coming in at a time where gender ideology, as you call it, has been in the news quite a lot over the last 2 years?
Yeah, now I've spoken to a lot of people, I have, and people have different opinions and things like that. But I feel like, maybe people would disagree with me, I feel like, as you said, minorities, and they're protected people, and everyone should be protected together. You know what I mean? We all should have human rights, everybody, no matter what way you want to live, should be respected.
Well, technically everybody is protected because the protected classes, I read them out already, are race, colour, nationality, religion, national or ethnic origin, descent, gender, that's man or woman I suppose as well, sex characteristics, sexual orientation or disability. It goes on, by the way, to define what it means by gender, and it says a gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender or with the person's which the person identifies, and includes transgender and a gender other than those of male and female.
Right, well, years ago, obviously things were different. And I think as generations go by, without the hate speech laws, I think children in schools and all, and everywhere they go, even at home, are being taught to be more kind to people anyway. I really do, you know.
Well, let me ask Susan.
We would slag everyone.
Well, let me just ask Susan on that note. Susan, you know, I suppose gender identity is a very new thing in society to some degree. When I say we're talking about it more now than we ever did before. And, you know, I suppose the point Anya's making is that, you know, teaching people just to be non-judgmental. And, you know, and in time things will change, but we can't just expect change. But there's always going to be, you know, those who will say, you know, well, I don't buy into it. I don't believe there's anything except males and females.
Yeah, but they seem to be the ones that are shouting louder at the moment.
But are they not allowed to shout louder? Are they not?
I don't think so.
They can shout as loud as they want. It's what they're saying. You know that my son and all his friends are going to attack your children. That's what they're shouting. That the schools. This is what I'm hearing.
Wrong,
that the schools are teaching, or they're grooming all the children to change their gender. And the government are all groomers, and anyone who comes out then as transgender is also a groomer.
I have seen stuff on social media, you know, about, you know, drag artists, you know, performing what I would consider to be lewd acts in front of children, but however. And I've seen some other ones that haven't been performing lewd acts in front of children. And I've seen some nasty comments in relation to those individuals. And to be honest with you, a lot of the time, I believe, some of the time, it's warranted in relation to those individuals who are, you know, doing those things. I don't mean that shouldn't be generalised into every transgender person or every drag artist or every person who does those things.
But unfortunately, it is. Mm-hmm. This is the new, you know, this is the new hatred that's around now. That anybody who has changed their gender is mentally ill and out to groom your children.
Everyone doesn't think that way, though. Everyone.
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying that there are a small minority on you who think like this, a very small minority.
Well, but
unfortunately, they have the louder voices. And only this evening, I was reading something online on a page, and it was just vile, you know, and it's so hurtful. But the likes, you know, my son and other people's children.
I'm assuming there is, and in relation to all characteristics, by the way, not just transgender, you know, be it out of LGBT or be it, you know, race. I see a lot of hurtful stuff online. but we can't protect people from being hurt. You know,
there's hurtful stuff, there's hatred.
I know,
stuff.
I understand,
Yeah.
but this is where I think there's a lack of understanding and transparency around this
Absolutely,
legislation.
Yeah, but the thing is now
Education is key.
what I've seen online now is they're trying to stop the education of, you know, that we're not allowed to teach our children about LGBT communities anymore.
Well, okay,
but
what do you say, Susan, to people who say, well, I don't want my children learning that there's 79 genders or 80 genders. I don't want my child learning those things.
Fine, but that's absolutely fine. I've no problem with that. You know, but don't teach them that this person who's transgender or who's coloured or black or whatever is going to attack you. Or is going to rape you, or possibly murder you.
Yes. Anya, do you understand the point Susan's making? I suppose that the
I
problem
do,
is
I
social
do,
media has made people generalise in terms.
And Niamh made a good point earlier about social media is the devil. It really is. They do need to intervene and stop that viciousness online. Definitely, I agree with that. But again, I don't mean hate speech laws. As Niamh said, I think. Well, I don't. She said you agreed with him. I think the people who run the platforms should intervene. They have to. It's terrible.
I think
nobody wants anyone bullied and going into suicide or anything like that. Of course,
but I think when it comes down to it, I suppose, Susan, we did have legislation here, incitement to hatred. On radio, we have it under the Broadcasting Act, by the way, incitement to hatred as well. For those kind of serious cases where people make horrible accusations and generalizations, about a particular community, be they racist or be they homophobic or transphobic, whatever it is, and they're hate-filled, So there's already legislation there. Somebody mentioned the Equality Act, if it's to do with getting employment or it's to do with the way somebody's treated. That's there already. A lot of people are arguing that why do we need more legislation? And the problem with the legislation is, and a lot of people are pointing this out. Like, for example, let me just read one piece of the legislation. I don't know, Niamh, if you've heard this, and I'm sorry, I'm running way out of time here tonight. Anyway, in any proceedings for an offence under this section where it is proved that the accused person was in possession of material such as referred to in subsection 1, and it is reasonable to assume that the material was not intended for personal use of the person shall be presumed until the contrary is proved to have been in possession of the material in contravention of subsection 1. So let's say I make up a meme and it's racist, right? And I send it to Niamh. Now, even though Niamh hasn't even used it, Niamh could be in trouble, even though she hasn't even... And it would be up to Niamh to prove that she wasn't going to pass it on to somebody else. I don't know how she would do that. She's presumed guilty without even being given a presumption of innocence. So, and I've passed it on to her.
How can they change? How can they, I thought we lived in a... Now, that I don't agree with.
Leon Trotsky will be proud of this legislation. I just have to say that, because that's what this is. And people talk about dystopian, but that's what this is. You're guilty. And this is one of the amendments that they wanted to make to the legislation, which was voted against the other night. That, in other words, you're guilty until proven innocent.
Well, you shouldn't be. I mean, everyone has the right to a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Yeah. And that's the country I want to live in. But the one point I would make is, and this is not meant to be offensive to anyone, but this has got to go every way. I understand that there are certain groups that are protected under this act, and that is absolutely fine. But again, going back to, as Anya rightly called it, the devil that can be social media, and especially that cesspit that is TikTok, there are some incredibly militant people on the other side too. And they are coming out with some things that aren't exactly decent towards the non-trans community. They are a very small minority, and the vast majority are turning against that and saying, no, don't listen, that's not what we're about. And I completely understand that. But if this legislation comes in, it has to be for everybody, not just certain groups that are deemed protected, because everybody can.
So what
be
we should be? Are we all?
hatred.
I mean, I don't know, ladies.
Why are they protected?
Why do we need to protect people so much? You know what I mean?
Because
disabled people, do they have protection like that?
Yeah, they would be included in it. Yeah,
I
they
didn't
would
know
be
that.
included
Just
in
curious, yeah.
Okay, but can I just say
people-
that there is
some people
exceptions to the
do.
law, and they say the exceptions were a reasonable or genuine contribution to literary, artistic, political, scientific, religious, or academic discourse. A statement that is the subject of the defence of absolute privilege. In other words, it's okay for the protected person to defend themselves and say something probably equally as hateful back. In other words, a defence of absolute privilege. So what I'm saying to you is, I find this legislation is not there to protect everybody. And like Anya, I don't believe everybody needs protection. I don't believe everybody needs protection. I mean, whatever happened to my mother used to say to me, sticks and stones will break your bones and names will never hurt you. Do you know, throughout your life, you are going to be offended. You are going to be hurt by people. But that doesn't mean people should go to jail. If somebody says something hurtful to you, Niamh, for example, I don't believe they should go to jail. I will condemn what they say to you with all of my might, but I don't believe they should go to jail for it.
No, I don't believe they should go to jail either. I
just
genuinely don't believe it. I believe they should, you know, if it is a campaign, like say, for example, against me, a campaign of absolute vile shite.
Well, now
against
now you're bordering on harassment. So if it's a campaign against you, well,
so-
people should be responsible.
But
for
you
that.
know, but they could have their social media privileges revoked because half of them aren't capable and shouldn't have a modem in their house.
You're listening to Nighttime Talk with Niall Boylan.
With Recruit.ie. Download our job search app today. Search for Recruit.ie in your smartphone app store.
Ireland's classic hits radio.
All right, welcome back. By the way, a lot of people are saying, how come 110 politicians against 14 voted yes? And the simple answer to that is because if you're a member of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil or Sinn Féin, for example, you have to toe the party line or you lose the whip. You can't vote against your party. So I'm assuming, and I can only assume, and by the way, the lists of politicians who voted yes and no are freely available to the public, by the way, online. And as I said to you already, the list of the 14 who voted no, I can tell you that because it's a short list. It was Richard Boyd Barrett, Michael Collins, Catherine Connolly, Michael Fitzmaurice, who we spoke to earlier on, Danny Healy-Rae, Michael Healy-Rae, Gino Kenny, Matthew McGrath, Michael McNamara, Paul Murphy, Carol Nolan, Richard O'Donoghue, Breed Smith, and Peadar Tobin from Ain 2. They're the ones who voted no. I guarantee you there were many politicians within the parties who would have liked to have voted no but couldn't or can't. They'll never admit that, mind you, because they have to toe the party line. But I think we're split down the middle on this when it comes to it. But stay there, Anya and Niamh. Let me go to Karen as well. Karen, you're on Ireland's Classic Hits Radio. How you doing, Karen?
I'm good, Niall. How are you?
Good.
Good. Listen, I've just been listening to this on the crime hate laws, and I'm coming from where I think it's a dreadful law. I'm seeing how most of the debate has been about transgenderism. There are people, women mainly, I'm sure, as you know, who are called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, yeah?
That's how
The
they're described,
hatred.
yes.
That's how they're described. The hatred that is spewed towards these women is unbelievable.
Yeah,
I have been told before on Facebook and social media that I deserve to die, that I should die because I don't believe men can become women and women can become men.
And you're entitled to hold that view. Many might disagree with you, but you're entitled to hold that view.
Absolutely, without being threatened that I should deserve to die. Now, it didn't particularly bother me, God's sake.
I'm assuming the majority of your protesting is in relation to women in sports and stuff like that. And I assume a lot of your protesting is in relation to that. Or women's rights.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, women's rights.
Women's
that
spaces,
women
safe
fought
spaces,
for.
etc.,
Yes,
etc.
that the suffragettes fought for years. And women don't want to lose them. I was at a gathering up in Belfast there a couple of weeks ago. Posey Parker spoke, where I'd let women speak. And it was simply women and some men gathering to talk. That is all. And there was a crowd over the other way that had the PSNI, fair dues to them, not been there. There was a line of them. Those people would have come over and we would have been dead. So this thing of protected people, these women need to be a protected species, characteristic, whatever you want to call it. Because
I assume so, because here, hang on, because the law explicitly says, that the protected characteristics are gender. Now, one of the characteristics is gender. So I'm assuming they mean by gender. Now, mind you, they give the definition of gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender. So your preferred gender is a woman. So I'm assuming you're protected under the legislation too, or should be certainly protected under the legislation too, I would imagine. I would like to think so. Or would you believe?
Well, if that is the case, I don't.
Well, you identify as a woman, don't you?
No, I don't identify as a woman. I am a woman.
we can
argue.
Okay.
But it's just excuse me. I heard, I can't remember that lady's name who has a transgender. Susan,
yes.
Saying
and that must be very difficult for Susan, and her son to be going out.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
But I see more hatred spewed out online against people who speak out against kids being taught this in school, men and women's bathrooms, men in sports. They just seem to think that no, they can just go without thinking of women who have trained all their life to be, in a certain sport or whatever. And that is considered transphobic. And that is
okay.
wrong.
We'll let Niamh just respond to that because I've only got 60 seconds before the news here. Okay, Niamh, it's a fair point. Karen is a self-proclaimed TERF. And I'm sure most people at this stage know what that is. People who stand up for their rights and they believe that men can't become women and women can't become men. They want to fight for women's rights and safe spaces and women in sports. What do you say to Karen, who says, she gets threatened regularly and she's been told, I hope you die?
But that's the point. I don't believe Karen is a TERF because she's not. She isn't.
But she is. She is a TERF. By definition of what the trans community would describe as a TERF, she is.
Oh, from what they would describe it as, yes. Okay. But in reality, I don't believe that she is because she's not once, and I've listened to Karen, not once has she said anything even remotely nasty or hateful about the trans community. She's expressing her point about women. And I agree with her because But here's the argument. Karen's up on a podium in the middle of Belfast or the middle of Dublin or the middle of Sydney or wherever the hell where Posey Parker was attacked over in Australia. She's up on a podium and she's saying, we want to fight for women's rights, for safe spaces. We don't accept men become women. And she's doing all of that stuff. That's because that's what she does, right? And all of a sudden, trans community or somebody spokesperson says, that's expressing hatred towards our community. I want her arrested.
Niall, can I say something?
Well, no, hang on. I mean, Niamh, that's the way this could be. This is the concern about hate speech laws. That's the way that could be interpreted.
That's what I was saying earlier on. It has to go both ways. You can't have one community maintaining that they are perfect and that they do nothing wrong when Karen has clearly said that she feared because she was speaking her truth. So if one group feels that they can be protected to speak their truth, everyone has to be allowed, unless you cross the line and you are absolutely 100% hateful. Karen has not once said that, they shouldn't be allowed to exist. She just said, this is my view.
Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio, the multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.